A wife should be not just a life partner, but also a real partner for her husband, support in all life's trials. However, if she is unable to achieve a balance between independence and cooperation, this can lead to serious consequences, up to the breakdown of relations. My name is Meryl Gillen, and I was a famous actress in the United States in the past. My career shone brightly in Hollywood. I attracted attention not only with my talent, but also with my charisma, which was able to charm people all over the world. My roles became a sensation, my success was written about in international publications, and my fame was truly enormous. But over time, I made a conscious choice to move away from the world of show business. Everything changed when I met Melvin, who was first my manager and later became my husband. He took care of me, of all aspects of my life, from health to personal happiness. We became inseparable, and soon we started running fashion stores together, which seemed to be a new stage in our lives. The decision to leave my career came to me at the age of 23, when I was at the top of my popularity. This decision caused a storm of emotions among my fans and the press, who could not accept my departure. The newspapers were full of headlines full of rumors and speculation, but I was unwavering. Melvin and I were happily married, and our entourage, although surprised, supported us. After completing my acting career, I decided to realize my long-held dream. I founded my own fashion brand. This project turned out to be a success, and our joint work with my husband has moved to a new level. Melvin took over the financial matters, and I continued to run our business as if we had found harmony again. Everything seemed perfect. However, lately I've been noticing that Melvin has changed. I looked at Melvin carefully, trying to catch the true meaning of his words. It seemed that behind his fatigue and irritation there was something much more than a simple dissatisfaction with our business relationship. His phrase that he was tired of following my orders was deeply embedded in my mind. I never expected to hear this from a man who has always been a pillar of support for me, always stood by me when I needed help or support. I have often noticed that Melvin prefers to hide his feelings, keep everything to himself, and only in the most intense moments his emotions break out. But then I didn't understand that such a strong discontent was accumulating inside him. What happened at work? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, even though my insides were bubbling with anxiety. I knew he wasn't the type to share his problems right away, and that his tendency to be silent often made it difficult for me to see the whole picture. He was always the one who endured to the last, waiting for me to figure out for myself that something was wrong. In those moments when I noticed his fatigue or anxiety, I tried not to put pressure on him. I understood that he was used to solving everything on his own and rarely asked for help. But even when I saw that it was hard for him, I tried to support him, knowing how he was always there for me when I was in difficult situations myself. Melvin was the one who helped me get out of many crises, including those that I could not have overcome alone. And so, even if it wasn't easy for me to tolerate his closeness, I never complained. I appreciated his support much more than I could put into words. However, his harsh words at that moment sounded like a bolt from the blue. His admission that he was tired of following my instructions puzzled me. I never thought that he could feel oppressed or depressed in our relationship, and even more so I did not imagine that he perceived my leadership as commanding. Yes, sometimes Melvin would say something like that when he was under a lot of stress at work, but I always thought it was just a temporary condition. He tried to appear strong and independent, hiding his vulnerabilities, and probably had nowhere to put his irritation and fatigue. At that moment, I remembered how I was in his place when I worked in Hollywood. I could be harsh and irritable when the pressure got too much, and then Melvin would support me, help me cope with the tension. But even in those moments when I was unfair to him, he always stayed by my side. I tried to understand his feelings through the lens of my past experience, but his current words still shocked me. I was literally shaking with incomprehension and confusion. Melvin continued to speak, his voice sounding hollow and tired. "Meryl is always busy, and I'm here to support her." I listened attentively, but these words only made it harder for me. After all, these were not just reproaches, but the accumulated pain of a man who for many years stood in the shadow of my career and success, assuming the role of an assistant and support. Although he earned well, in recent years he began working for our company and in fact became my subordinate, since the finance department was under my control. I didn't hesitate to take it for granted, not realizing that it could put pressure on his self-esteem. Have you ever thought that the one who earns more has more power? His words pierced me like a knife. I've always believed that in marriage it doesn't matter who earns more. I saw our union as a partnership where financial issues were secondary to love and mutual support. But now it became clear that it mattered a lot more to Melvin than I could have imagined. When you come home, you're still busy. And when we go shopping, you just buy whatever you want, he continued, and I could hear the pain seeping into his voice. Melvin seemed to be completely sincere, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something in his behavior had changed. His questions about my attention and how he felt undervalued wouldn't let me go. I remembered how many years ago, when our lives were not so secure, he really supported me, and his financial help was invaluable then. We went through difficult times when my income didn't cover all my needs, and Melvin was the one who helped me stay afloat. Therefore, when I achieved success, it seemed natural to me that now it was my turn to support him. My income has always provided for our home, and it seemed to me that this was my way of expressing gratitude for his past sacrifices and dedication. We had long since moved out of the era when money was an issue, but now that I was running a successful fashion business, Melvin wasn't the one providing for us. His salary in our company was rather symbolic, and I always considered it a tribute to his past support. However, his current complaints annoyed me. It seemed to me that he was forgetting everything that I had done for him. I bought expensive things and travel from my savings, which I managed, and if anyone really sacrificed, it was me, my time, my energy. But Melvin continued to insist, and his words pushed me away more and more. Meryl, you're too free. I want to have more free time and travel slowly, he said, and there was an unusual hardness in his voice. He continued, the salary is good, but it's not the same as when I worked at Cheese. I knew that Cheese was his old place of work, where he was a successful manager, and when he left there to join my company, I considered it an expression of his desire to be closer to me. He offered to work with me, and I, wanting to spend more time with my husband, agreed, although I never asked him for such a step. Now, listening to his reproaches, I couldn't understand why he suddenly started talking to me in this way. Haven't I always tried to make his life comfortable? Didn't I provide him with all the comforts and the opportunity to work in my company, where he could be next to me? But it didn't seem to be enough for him. His words sounded selfish, and I began to wonder if he was asking too much. And so, while I was still trying to make sense of all this, Melvin made a request that added fuel to the fire. Meryl, my parents are about to turn 62. I want to take 3 weeks off to celebrate with them and take them to Australia. They've never been there, and I want to show them delicious food and beautiful places, he said, and his voice was full of determination. These words took me by surprise. It's not that 3 weeks of vacation was something impossible. Our company has always been honest and flexible with employees, and no one was against if someone took a vacation. But why did he decide to negotiate this with me, as if it were something special? He could have just told me about it in a less formal way, but instead it all seemed too formal. I felt that there was more to his words than just a desire to spend time with my parents. Trying to stay calm, I replied, of course, you can take a vacation, but unfortunately, I won't be able to join this year. We have an important event, a fashion show in London, and my schedule is already filled with preparations. Maybe we can reschedule this trip for next year? I can then adjust my plans and join. But Melvin, with a casual smile, declined my offer. It's okay, Meryl. We're just going to celebrate with my family. I want to spend some quality time with them. My job in accounting allows me to be away for a week without problems. His words sounded so calm and confident that I did not know how to react. Of course, our company had strict deadlines and two big events this year that did not allow us to take a vacation at the same time. But his refusal of my offer to negotiate another date bothered me. Melvin was on vacation, and his absence from the house felt strange. I'd been thinking a lot about his last words, about our marriage and what went wrong. His remarks that he deserved free time too, as if I was depriving him of something important, kept ringing in my head. It was hard not to take it personally, as if my efforts, my achievements, this whole house that rests on my back suddenly became insignificant to him. I knew Melvin could be careless in his words, often speaking without thinking about the consequences, but this time his words penetrated too deeply. I felt rejected. When my secretary noticed that I was lost in thought and clearly upset, her offer to speak out was a salvation. She is a young but very perceptive woman, whom I always appreciate for her ability to support me not only in company matters, but also in personal matters. She and I managed to become closer than an ordinary boss and subordinate. I could always count on her common sense, her simple but accurate advice. This time, when I finally told her about what was going on between Melvin and me, she didn't keep quiet. "You were too soft on him, boss," she said, looking at me with her serious eyes. Her words cut into me, as if they revealed the truth that I had avoided admitting myself. She continued, "I understand that you love him, but that's no reason to let him treat you like that. You are a successful, strong woman, Meryl, and you deserve more respect." These words hit the heart of the matter. For a long time, I avoided harsh conversations with Melvin, trying to maintain harmony in our relationship. After all, I've always believed that love and understanding should be above petty quarrels. But now that the situation has gone so far, I began to wonder, maybe I really allowed him too much. Melvin, of course, has always been supportive, but how much longer can I put up with the fact that he ignores my feelings, my efforts, and everything I do for us? "Don't give him any reason to think he can treat you like that." Her words rang in my head for a long time after our conversation. I understood that her directness was a manifestation of the care that I missed so much at that moment. She was one of those rare people who dared to speak to me as an equal without fear that her words might offend. She knew that I was strong enough to accept the truth, even if it was uncomfortable. And I appreciated it. Despite the fact that Melvin was absent, the tension in our relationship remained. We slept in separate bedrooms even before his trip, and this gap between us was a clear sign that something was going wrong. My attempts to mitigate the situation did not lead to success, and his harsh words only increased the feeling of misunderstanding between us. Every action he took, every gesture, now made me doubt him. Melvin was always caring, but for some reason right now his support seemed cold and aloof. What has changed? Why did he suddenly feel unappreciated, even though I tried to give him the best? My mind was spinning in search of an answer, but I couldn't find a clear reason. Was it his own dissatisfaction, or was I the cause of his disappointment? I spent long hours at work trying to distract myself from this heavy feeling that our marriage was teetering on the edge. When my mother-in-law said the words that the trip was paid for by me, I felt everything inside me shrink. I immediately realized that something had gone wrong. Melvin had never told me that he was going to pay for their vacation at my expense, and now this fact suddenly surfaced, like an icy stream that swallowed up all my thoughts. I stood with the phone in my hand, silently, just listening to her friendly but uninformed explanations. Of course, she did not suspect that she herself had revealed to me the secret that Melvin had so carefully hidden. There was no malice in her voice, just concern and gratitude for generosity that I didn't even suspect. My thoughts whirled, and my rage began to build. How could he do this without warning me? How could he manage my money so casually, as if it were his own? Yes, we are a family, yes, I have always supported him in everything, but there are boundaries that cannot be crossed. I covered our common expenses, I paid for his needs, and it was all fine as long as there was honesty and trust between us. But now it all seemed broken. I tried to keep my composure, but my head was already full of worries. The flight alone for 6 people cost at least $12,000, not to mention accommodation and other expenses. How could he spend such a sum so easily without consulting me? The anger inside me grew, and the calls that went unanswered only added fuel to the fire. I became more and more convinced that Melvin was deliberately avoiding the conversation, realizing that the truth would be revealed to me. And now this truth has thrown me off balance. My mother-in-law continued to apologize, offering to return the money, but her kind words only increased my pain. I didn't want her or anyone else in the family to feel guilty, because they, like me, became hostages of this situation. Of course, they did not know that the trip was paid for at my expense, and they probably sincerely believed that it was a gesture of goodwill on my part. But what was really behind this noble painting? My thoughts suddenly turned to the moment and Melvin told me that he needed more free time and that he deserved to relax and spend time with his family. Now his words took on a new meaning. It turns out that he had already planned this trip, organized everything behind my back, using my finances, as if it were something taken for granted. I felt cheated, betrayed, as if he had taken not only my money, but also my trust, tearing our tacit partnership agreement to pieces. When I hung up, my temples throbbing, I couldn't help but think about how far our estrangement had gone. Melvin didn't just use my financial support, he did it secretly, without any discussion. I believed in our union, in our life together, where trust has always been the foundation of everything. But now I suddenly realized that I was on the verge of a serious crisis, and this crisis had already begun to corrode our family from the inside. "My husband and I will definitely refund your money," her last words echoed in my mind, as if they were another confirmation that our union was on the verge of disintegration. These are no longer just disagreements or petty quarrels that can be settled with conversations and compromises. It was something more, something much deeper. Each new fact that I learned plunged me into a state of increasing horror and confusion. The whole gold card situation was the catalyst that I began to doubt not only Melvin's actions, but also the very essence of our marriage. The revelations coming from my in-laws were like a hammer blow to my faith in the man I once trusted completely. When my father-in-law mentioned the gold card, everything fell into place. Melvin, whom I once considered honest and loyal, secretly used a company card to finance a luxury trip, hiding behind my absence. This card was an essential part of our financial system. It was only used for large corporate expenses, and the two of us had access to it. I thought I was doing the right thing by entrusting her to Melvin, because he had always been a part of our business, but now I clearly saw that this was not just using the company's resources. It was a betrayal. With every word from my mother-in-law and father-in-law, I realized how deeply I was mistaken. The initiative of the trip, as it turned out, did not come from Melvin at all, but from his sister and her husband. These two have always tried to keep their distance from me, creating an appearance of cold but forced family respect. They never took me seriously, and my successful career and the position of CEO were just a reason for their dissatisfaction. Their coldness and hidden hostility were always manifested in small things, disparaging glances, caustic comments, in which it was easy to detect notes of envy and condemnation. But I tried to turn a blind eye to it for the sake of Melvin and his family, trying to keep the peace. Now I saw their intentions clearly. This trip was not just an act of charity or a family vacation. It was an attempt to isolate me, to leave me aside, while taking advantage of my resources, as if I were just an invisible sponsor of their pleasures. Melvin became a pawn in their game, and perhaps he himself was not against this role. What made him change so much? Why did he decide to go behind my back? When my mother-in-law mentioned that they didn't dare contact me on Melvin's instructions, I felt a lump of pain grow in my chest. He was the one who insisted that I not be disturbed. He, knowing how much I love his parents, knowing that I would gladly find a way to join them if possible. But he made the decision for me, without giving me a chance to even think about it. He took advantage of my employment, using it as a cover to hide his lies. The words about the golden card were the last straw. I quickly checked the safe where we kept corporate cards and important documents, and, as I feared, the card was not in place. At that moment, my soul was filled not only with anger, but also with disappointment. It wasn't just a petty financial crime. It was disrespectful to our common affairs, to the work that I put into the development of the company, and to the trust that I gave him as my husband and business partner. When I voiced my suspicions to Melvin's parents, their faces instantly paled. They seemed unable to believe that their son could have gone so far. His mother began to panic, convincing me that they would immediately return with him to sort out everything that had been done. Her concern for the family's reputation was genuine, and she was willing to take any blame if it would help in any way. The father-in-law, in his usual, strict style, with a stern expression on his face, also agreed that it would be necessary to bear the consequences. But I knew it would be unfair to blame them for what happened. They, like me, were deceived. Melvin seemed to deliberately isolate me from their family, planning everything behind my back. His actions went beyond personal grudges or grievances. It was something more, something much more devastating for our family and business. I sighed heavily, realizing that now it would not just be necessary to return the money or eliminate the consequences of his actions. I had to restore my dignity, deal with the betrayal that destroyed our relationship, and figure out what to do next. Every word he said only increased my frustration and anger. Melvin, who was once a symbol of calmness and reliability for me, now turned out to be weak and hypocritical. His fake calmness in conversation, carelessness, and mocking tone gave him away to the fullest. At that moment, it became clear to me that he had long perceived me not as a partner, but as a resource, a convenient object for manipulation. And all these games, hidden hints about the supposedly ideal husband and a busy-at-work employee, turned out to be only a futile attempt to cover up their machinations. What about the company, Melvin? Have you been messing with her funds? I asked, wanting to throw him off balance. And it worked. His instant reaction revealed the true intentions that I hadn't noticed for so long. His voice, usually light and relaxed, became tense, and his tone became harsh and aggressive. What does it all mean? Are you suspecting me? His voice trembled, betraying his excitement. This was not the man with whom I once dreamed of building a life together. I could hardly contain my laughter at his naive attempt to justify himself, so absurdly and clumsily, as if he himself was entangled in his own lies. Even his manner of speaking, his phrases, suddenly became so unnatural, as if he already saw in me not a wife, but an enemy who needed to be outmaneuvered and deceived. Melvin has always been able to manipulate the situation. This time, he decided to evade responsibility by switching his attention to something else. But instead of making excuses, he started making accusations, as if he hoped it would distract me. By the way, is the house okay? I don't like going back to a dirty place. You don't want me to think about divorce like that guy from work talked about his wife, do you? His words sounded so rude and derogatory that I was literally speechless for a moment. That's what he really is. Instead of at least trying to apologize or admit his mistakes, he turned to personal attacks, trying to make me look guilty of his own misconduct. For him, I was not a woman sharing life and business with him, but a convenient device for solving his household and financial problems. A wife is her husband's maid, these were his thoughts. He dared to say what I now understand he had been thinking for a long time. Melvin no longer saw me as an equal. For him, I stopped being the person he once loved and respected. His words were filled with contempt, his attitude was devoid of even a drop of care. Do you really think it's possible to get off that easy? I couldn't hide my annoyance anymore. His attempts to blame me for some fictitious problems at home and start a conversation about divorce against the background of his betrayal looked so pathetic that I could only sigh coldly. If he hadn't started digging into his ridiculous excuses, maybe I would still have doubts. But now everything has become clearer than ever. His last words, "You want this," sounded like a kind of threat, but I already knew that all his threats were empty. He no longer had any power over me. His feeble attempt to shift the blame onto me revealed his true nature. He, like many others, couldn't accept that I was getting stronger. That I'm no longer the kind of woman who can be manipulated and made to feel guilty for everything that happens. I sighed softly, realizing that there was no point in continuing this conversation. Melvin no longer existed for me as a person with whom I could build a future. His mask was torn off, and there was only an emptiness underneath, an emptiness that he was trying to fill at the expense of others. Melvin could no longer hide his fear and despair. His voice was trembling, and the panic in his voice was becoming more and more noticeable. He was trapped in a trap that he had created, and now all he could do was unsuccessfully try to climb out of this hole that he had dug for himself. I listened to him stutter and try to justify himself to the hotel management, to his sister and her husband, but his excuses sounded more and more ridiculous and meaningless. "You did something, didn't you?" Melvin's voice pierced the silence in the car, clearly reverberating through the speakerphone. His tone was tense, almost hysterical, as if he suddenly realized that I was no longer the woman who silently endured his false promises and betrayals. "Yes, Melvin, I did." My voice sounded cold and even. I saw no point in hiding anymore that I had been planning to expose him step by step all this time. Yesterday, I contacted the president of the credit card company we signed a contract with. Despite the fact that it was off hours, he agreed to help me. He immediately suspended the company's credit card. "So if you were going to pay for your expensive pleasures, you didn't succeed." In the background, I heard Melvin's sister start to demand an explanation from him in a panic. She knew that this trip had been arranged for someone else's money, and now everything was falling apart right in front of her eyes. Their well-being depended on Melvin being able to get out of this situation, but they still did not fully realize that the exit was closed. I felt a sense of grim satisfaction rising inside me. They thought they could cheat me and the company, and now they were cornered. You can't do this," shouted Melvin, his voice shaking with anger and impotence. "You're getting ready for a divorce, come on. I don't deserve this." I calmly paused, letting him realize that his threats were no longer valid. He tried to scare me into a divorce, but now it sounded so empty and hopeless, as if he already realized that he was losing everything. I continued coolly, "Yes, Melvin, I'm ready for a divorce. I'm not going to be married to a thief. I've already talked to a lawyer, and we're starting the divorce process." Every word I said was a blow to him. He had never been embarrassed by my emotions before. He always believed that I would forgive him for the sake of family or for the sake of work, but now he realized that I would not come back. Our marriage had been dead long before that moment, and all I had to do was break free from the shackles he had thrown over me. Melvin hadn't expected such determination. His heart was probably pounding and his thoughts were confused. I heard him let out a strange, almost desperate sigh, and that was the last straw of his pride. Meanwhile, the hotel manager was relentlessly demanding payment, and Melvin had nowhere to go. A blocked card meant that his party was over and he would have to answer for his actions. His family probably thought they could just hide and avoid the consequences, but I've already made sure they don't have a way out. Mom and Dad have already checked the taxi I reserved for them. It's gone. "No one's coming for you, Melvin," I said with cold certainty. Now they were all trapped. Melvin's sister, his friends, the administrators, they all witnessed his collapse, and no one was going to save him. Melvin began to panic even more, and his anger turned back to me. "How can you do this to me? Do you think that this is the order of things?" His voice turned to a scream, and despair became more and more obvious with every second. "I've put up with your irresponsible behavior for too long," I replied calmly. "You used me, Melvin, and I'm not going to take it anymore. I gave you enough time to change, but you left me no choice." At that moment, I knew that his despair was the result not only of fear of losing money or status, but also of understanding that I was no longer going to be the kind of woman who could be humiliated and deceived. Melvin, still in a state of panic, did not realize how deeply he was mired in his own intrigues. His fear was almost palpable through the screen as he, speaking haltingly, showed a video of a slum area where he and his sister and husband found themselves in the midst of chaos. I looked at these shots with that cold calmness that comes when everything goes according to plan, but even I could not have imagined that events would take such a turn. "Meryl, what kind of place is this?" Melvin shouted, trying to shout over the hubbub of the crowd behind him. "What did you do? This is some kind of misunderstanding. We are being threatened. We need to get out of here." His face was distorted with anxiety, and fear and helplessness flashed in his eyes. As he passed the camera to his surroundings, I saw dirty streets where people seemed ready to pounce on anyone who looked even a little richer or a stranger. Melvin and his relatives clearly stood out among these people, and their status, which had previously brought them power, now turned against them, turning them into an easy target. "You have to come and help us, Meryl," pleaded Melvin, his voice trembling and his hands clutching the phone convulsively. I saw Melvina's sister looking around in horror, trying to avoid the rude stares of passers-by. Her husband seemed to be in the same shock, his face turned pale, and fear flashed in his eyes. I smiled, even though they couldn't see it. It was a perfect irony. Those who used to live at someone else's expense now found themselves in a position where their money could not save them. And this became their punishment for all the lies and manipulations. "Melvin, you are reaping the fruits of your actions," I said coolly. "I can't help you now. This is the perfect place to reflect on what you've done. You were given a chance to correct your mistakes, but you chose deception and betrayal." More and more noises could be heard behind Melvin. The people around them clearly understood that these rich guests were in a vulnerable position. Some of the locals were already moving towards them, and judging by the harsh shouts, they were not going to stand on ceremony. "Meryl, please don't leave us here," Melvina's sister, for the first time ever, pleaded. Her eyes darted around, and she was clearly aware that they were on the verge of real danger. "We didn't mean to hurt you. We thought we could pull through." But her excuses sounded hollow, like a feeble attempt to convince me of something that no longer existed. All I felt at that moment was indifference. At the same time, my secretary, who was nearby, noticed my unperturbed gaze and leaned towards me with a slight smile. "Are you sure it is? Is it good for them?" she asked softly, her voice full of irony. "It's the perfect punishment," I replied, averting my eyes from the phone screen. "Let them enjoy what they deserve. This place might be the best lesson for them." An hour later, as expected, Melvin called me again. But now his voice sounded different. Anxiety and helplessness were replaced by real horror. This time there were screams in the background, and the atmosphere of the video call became even more tense. Melvin was agitated to the limit, his face distorted with fear, and his tone was panic. "Meryl, what's going on? Why are these people?" He gasped, as if he couldn't find the words to describe what was happening. I looked at the screen again and saw how the locals began to surround Melvin and his group. Apparently, they were unlucky enough to be in the very center of attention, and now they had become easy prey for those who do not spare either men or women. "Did you want us to suffer?" Melvin continued to shout, his voice breaking into hysterical notes. He clearly hadn't expected this turn of events and didn't know how to handle the situation. All he had to do was ask for help. And just at this moment, my relatives suddenly intervened in the conversation. Melvin's mom and dad, whom I had safely flown back to the United States on a private jet, suddenly appeared on a video call. "Mom? Dad?" Melvin seemed shocked by their sudden presence. "What are you doing here? You were supposed to be with us." "We're back home, Melvin," his parents replied coldly. Meryl brought us back on a private jet. We're already safe. And yes, we understood everything. You tried to frame Meryl, and now you get what you deserve. This unexpected turn of events struck Melvin even more. His father spoke in a calm but stern tone, indicating that they no longer intended to protect him. Melvin and his entourage found themselves in a situation that they probably could not have foreseen even in their worst dreams. The Australian slums, where they ended up on my instructions, became a testing place for them, where every day was full of humiliation and suffering. The locals, to whom I conveyed my demands, gladly accepted the opportunity to deal with the intruders. I didn't ask them for anything supernatural, just that they do with these people as they see fit. The answer came immediately. The locals took it as a challenge and an opportunity to show their strength. Melvin and his group became unwitting prisoners of this environment, surrounded by the harsh reality of the Australian slums, where there was no place for pity or compassion. Left with no money and no way to return home, they were trapped. I could imagine how their status and privileges, which they once took for granted, became their greatest burden in this environment. They had nothing to defend themselves with, and none of their usual tools of influence helped in this world. In a conversation with the hotel receptionist, who helped me carry out my revenge from the very beginning, I confirmed the details of their concluded deal. My new ally happened to know the man who was the de facto leader in these slums, and they agreed that this man would keep an eye on Melvin and his group. In exchange, I promised to thank him with a good drink the next time I was in Australia. I was confident that I could leave them under his supervision, knowing that they would not face an immediate threat to their lives. However, their living conditions were far from the luxurious standards they were used to. This receptionist also invited me to perform on the stage of their hotel, a rare honor, considering that I have not given live performances for a long time. He proudly said that the only video of my concert, recorded a long time ago, still remains his personal treasure. His offer looked tempting. I was supposed to stay at their hotel, where they promised me VIP service and the opportunity to arrange a performance at the most exquisite venue. It would become a symbol not only of triumph, but also of complete liberation from the past. By taking revenge on Melvin and his entourage with the help of allies from the hotel, I was able to complete one of the most important stages of my life. The divorce from Melvin was finalized quickly, without unnecessary complications. I finally felt freedom, a real lightness that made my head spin. My new state was like sweet air filled with possibilities that I had only dreamed of before. Melvina's sister and her husband, those who were once part of this conspiracy, also suffered their punishments. They were fired from their jobs due to a long and unexplained absence. Locals in Australia deprived them of their phones, and, being cut off from the outside world, they could not contact anyone. These people, who used to consider themselves superior to others, are now left without communication and without the opportunity to return to their former lives. My relatives, with whom I discussed the situation, explained everything so well that it did not become a matter for the police. No one tried to help them or even draw attention to their plight. It was the end of our relationship, once and for all. Melvin and his family have gone out of my life like an empty, worthless memory. I focused on my career, on my ambitions, and felt the taste of freedom again. Life began to play with new colors, and I felt that I could finally be myself, without looking back at the past. Sometimes, though, I call my secretary to find out how Melvin and his band are doing. They still live in harsh conditions, deprived of their former luxury and comfort. Every day for them is a struggle for survival. And although I could show mercy, I don't feel the slightest pity. After all, I did everything to ensure that their lives were not in immediate danger. It was my only gesture of mercy. Now I'm enjoying my life to the fullest, surrounded by people who really value me. We laugh, spend time together, and every minute of my new life is filled with joy and confidence. The world around me has become alive and bright again, filled with perspectives and real feelings.